A foiled armed incursion into Venezuela played out in the early hours this Sunday. The Venezuelan government says mercenaries supported by the US and Colombia came by speedboat about 30 miles out of Caracas. No evidence of fighting was reported in the capital or anywhere else in the nation, but there's a lot of talk about who is possibly behind this and what's next. So joining us now to discuss, Daniel McAdams. He is the executive director at the Ron Paul Institute. All right, Daniel, a retired American Green Beret by the name of Jordan Goudreau came clean about his involvement on Twitter. Let's listen to that real quick.
At 1700 hours, a daring amphibious raid was launched from the border of Colombia deep into the heart of Caracas. Our men are continuing to fight right now. Our units have been activated in the south, west, and east of Venezuela.
Okay, you heard him right there. He confirms a number of other active operations across the country, but the U.S. State Department discounted this report of this coup attempt. What do you say to that? I mean, they say it's not a U.S. state operation.
Well, it recalls certainly the 1961 Bay of Pigs, and it's been humorously referred to, but probably accurately, as the Bay of Piglets, this operation, because it seems to be pretty bungled and botched from the beginning. It seems pretty unlikely and pretty impossible that the U.S. government would launch such a half-baked idea. But then, of course, when you look at the kinds of people that unfortunately President Trump has directing his Latin America policy, you have decades-long history of launching such boneheaded schemes that would be laughable if so many people weren't being killed. Let's not forget, we're talking about Elliott Abrams being in charge of our democratization plans for Venezuela. Abrams himself, of course, lied to Congress, was facing felony charges for lying to Congress, has a long and bloody history in Latin America. So I wouldn't put anything past Elliott Abrams.
Now, speaking of Mr. Abrams, obviously he's been spearheading this. I mean, it's not even a hidden thing. It's a flat-out removal of Maduro is what he wants. But just last week, he promoted a democratic and peaceful approach, so as he calls it, to this new government in Venezuela. So, I mean, what gives? I mean, is this a coup just kind of dressed up differently?
Well, I think Mr. Abrams has a different view of democratic and peaceful than you and I do, Manila. His view of peace is peace through bloodshed. But, you know, it's clear that he's grasping at straws. This was his last hurrah. He was going to bring democracy to Venezuela. It's been more than a year of absolute and utter failure, corruption on the part of the Venezuelan opposition, who Mike Pence decided was the president of Venezuela. It's been a long history of really a bungled policy. And unfortunately, President Trump is not seeing through the failure of these people. So, yeah, Elliott Abrams is a failure.
and Venezuela obviously is denouncing what they're calling both U.S. and Colombian involvement into this plot. But this isn't the first time there has been a failed plot to overthrow Maduro. We remember, as he was giving a speech on stage, there was somebody trying to parachute in. There was a bad drone attack. I mean, what's different about this time?
Well, it goes back before Maduro. Remember Hugo Chavez and the CIA having him in their sights through the use of the National Endowment for Democracy and others to overthrow him, and he was successfully overthrown for a couple of days. The U.S. has wanted to destabilize and overthrow the Venezuelan government for many, many years. If this is the latest scheme, I don't know, maybe they're shopping at a low-rent place, because it doesn't look like a sophisticated plot to me, in this case.
And lastly, there's some reports floating around out there that there are ties between opposition leader Juan Guaido and this latest incursion into Venezuela with this ex-Green Beret. Do you know anything about that? And does it stem from any of that money that they recently received from the U.S. freezing Venezuela's money from Citibank?
Well, I think the opposition is good at spending money that's not theirs. It's actually our taxpayer money that they're spending. There's also some speculation as to whether large U.S. business interests are involved in this. Maybe they're hoping to get a nice big chunk of the action when it's overthrown, but which probably won't happen. But let's not forget the unintended consequences of U.S. interventionist foreign policy is that this bungled attempt actually makes Maduro look a lot better, certainly to his own electorate. Here's a guy who can take care of these Yankees coming down to overthrow our government. Here's a guy who can protect us. So once again, they actually have the opposite effect. The neocons have the opposite effect of what they claim to be doing.
Yeah, if there wasn't actually real lives at stake and actual blood that could be shed, this is almost comical, Daniel. We just got to leave it right there. Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute, thank you so much.
Thanks, Manila.